Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Happy Tuesday to you. Man, it is a pretty day across Acadiana. Another cold front coming through. This one really meaning business, though, and actually making it feel a lot more like October. Of course, we still have major Hurricane Milton in the Gulf of Mexico, which set all kinds of records during the day yesterday. So we're going to talk more about Milton and what its impacts are going to be now that it's going to be moving away from the Yucatan and heading off toward Florida. Massive evacuation happening on the west coast of Florida as some serious wind, storm surge, and flooding rains will be pushing into those regions. Those folks have basically, today's the last full day. They got part of maybe Wednesday to wrap up some last minute things, but this is definitely going to be a major impact to portions of the Sunshine State. Real quick, we'll go through some of the particulars. We're at 78 degrees here in Lafayette and with mostly sunny skies. And I can't remember the last time we had a current temperature of under 80 degrees at noon and it wasn't raining or cloudy outside. It is gorgeous out there. The heat index actually should be 78, not 89. The dew point has dropped off nicely and the humidity at 37%. A big breeze out there too, at times gusting over 20 miles per hour. And look at some of those skies today. Not a cloud in sight. It is gorgeous out there and it's going to stay that way for the remainder of the day. Temperature should top out in the mid 80s. So let's go ahead and get started kind of on Hurricane Milton. I wanted to show you the latest radar there of Southwest Florida. This is actually coming out of the Key West radar site, and this is not actually part of Milton. Milton is just outside of the radar imagery, but there are a few blobs of precipitation that are kind of coming on up. So unfortunately for some folks there on that last day of full day of preparations, there are going to be some bigger thunderstorms kind of rolling onto the west coast. Now there is Milton, and it's clearly seen there, right there at the northern tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. But at the same time, we've got a very deep trough that has dipped all the way down in the western part of the Gulf of Mexico. And you got more of a ridge of high pressure out here. So the thinking is this is going to be moving somewhere in this general direction across the western part of Florida over the next 24 to 36 hours. Yesterday, of course, Hurricane Milton getting its winds up to 180 miles per hour. Pressure dropped down below 900 millibars, and there's only 5 other hurricanes that have done that since we've been kind of keeping track, especially there over the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico, I think this became the second strongest hurricane by pressure, just behind Hurricane Wilma, which was back in 2005. And if you didn't know, Hurricane Wilma's pressure dropped all the way down to 882 millibars, and after it left the Yucatan Peninsula, it made its way back kind of in the same general direction over toward Florida, but it is the lowest pressure ever recorded in the Western Hemisphere. That was Hurricane Wilma back in 2005. And also the pressure with Milton dropping just 1 millibar shy of the lowest pressure of Hurricane Rita back in 2005 as well. So this one is up in the top in the record books now. And as you look at the satellite imagery, you can see it's now starting to make more of that east-northeasterly direction. We think it's going to start to pull a little bit more toward the northeast. There are going to be some wobbles with the center of circulation here too over the next couple of days. And I wanted to show you, I love these imageries, and I do have the links for the satellite imagery down in the description below, but this is just a 1-minute interval of the last 90 minutes. So you can see that there's kind of a little bit of a wobble due east and then just a little bit north of east. But what happened overnight after it peaked out at 180 miles per hour, a lot of times these major hurricanes like this, they go what's called an eyewall replacement cycle. So basically the inner eyewall starts to collapse and a new eyewall starts to develop on the outside of that. And Recon was out there this morning. They were actually seeing 2 separate eyewalls and then the initial one eventually collapsing. So there's a couple of things that happen when that goes on. First, your wind speeds do tend to drop off and your pressure starts to rise a little bit. And we did see the wind speeds go down to 145 for a while, but it's picked back up now to 150. Another thing that happens when you see these eyewall replacement cycles is it tends to show a growth in the overall size of the hurricane. Because remember, yesterday when this was peaking out at 180, this was a tiny little hurricane, very tightly wound, and the eye of the hurricane was only about 10 miles wide, and the hurricane force winds only went out about 25 miles from the center, and the tropical storm force winds only went out about 75 miles from the center. So what's going to be changing is not only are we going to see this probably maintaining major hurricane status, which is Category 3 or higher, but we're going to start to see the wind field expanding, and you'll also see the entire structure of the hurricane growing as well. So we've already seen it grow quite a bit just in the last 24 hours size-wise, but as you see, the wind speeds and are down and the pressure is up just a little bit. But it's got some very warm waters with some high heat content to go through. It's in an environment with some relatively low wind shear, so it does have a chance that we could see a little more strengthening and then maybe some weakening right before it gets to land. But as I've said, this is going to be a major hurricane as it reaches the west coast of Florida. Notice you have hurricane warnings on both the west coast and the east coast, because this is going to be picking up forward speed, so it's going to be maintaining hurricane strength all the way across the peninsula and then pushing back out over the Atlantic Ocean. Remember, this is a high population area of Central Florida. You've got Tampa and the surrounding suburbs and the bigger cities there. You've got Orlando, and then off to the east, you've got Daytona and Cape Canaveral and other major cities on the east coast of the United States. So that central I-4 corridor of Florida is a high population area, so there's going to be a lot of folks that are going to be impacted by this. The track forecast has not changed a whole lot. It's still going anywhere from the northern part of Pinellas County, which is basically that little piece of land that sticks out around the east side of Tampa Bay. It's where Clearwater and St. Pete Beach is, and then of course you've got Tampa that's inland on Tampa Bay, and then to the south you've got Sarasota. So anywhere between say those areas over Pinellas County, the northern part of Pinellas County, will probably see the strongest winds coming in and possibly taking on the eyewall. And some of the cities that are there are Newport Richey, Tarpon Springs, Clearwater, down to St. Pete. You've also got Longboat Key, Siesta Key, and Sarasota, Bradenton down there to the south as well. So there's going to be a lot of cities that are going to be impacted by this, and a lot of folks are already on the move. The forecast intensity guidance is still looking quite interesting. So here for the next 12 to 24 hours, basically every single model keeps this a Category 3, most of them centered here in the low end, low to medium end Category 4, and then your landfall is going to be coming right about in this particular, somewhere in this area right here is where your landfall is, between 24 and 36 hours, because we think it is going to make landfall sometime tomorrow evening into tomorrow night. So that 24 to 36 time period, basically every model is at Category 3 or Category 4. So this is going to be a very significant hurricane as it reaches land. Could it still be a strong Category 4? Absolutely. Could it weaken to a Cat 2? There's a chance for that as well. So there's still some uncertainty, and there's still a bit of a spread. And with the models, they're doing pretty good right now, but I have to say, with the initial formation of Milton last week, this was really not calling for anything to happen, and then we just went from 0 to 60 and nothing flat there on Saturday going into Sunday. So we'll have to watch those models and see what happens. We're kind of more in a real-time forecast rather than a forecast at this point. What we do know is the storm surge is going to be significant, and most of these areas experienced storm surge flooding during Hurricane Helene, which is still less than 2 weeks ago. Remember, it made landfall 2 weeks ago this coming Thursday. And that storm surge was widespread all the way from South Florida all the way up to where the center of circulation was. And as Hurricane Milton comes in, even though the most significant storm surge is going to be a little bit more concentrated, it is going to be 10 to 15 feet there along the coast, anywhere through Tampa Bay, and then going down to the south through about Sarasota. So even Inglewood Beach, which is getting down closer to Port Charlotte and down toward Fort Myers, could possibly see some storm surge tides of over 10 feet. And those tides go up to 7 to 10 feet all the way down to around Naples as well. And even the Florida Keys are going to be dealing with some storm surge. And then once the hurricane crosses over, you might get that return flow that comes off the northern side of that. So storm surge is going to be an issue on the Atlantic side as well. So as we've said, this is not going to be just concentrated to Tampa. This is going to be a widespread hurricane event. And that's why we say, don't pay attention to the line that's in the middle of the cone. And at the same time, notice that these effects go well beyond the hurricane cone. The cone is only forecasting the position of the center of circulation, and the cone is only as wide so that 2/3 of all previous forecasts in the 5 years would fall within that cone. So you have a little bit of a margin of error on each side. But we all know that the effects, just like we learned with Hurricane Helene, can go well beyond that. And when you have different kinds of elevation or different types of topography like you saw with Helene, a lot of folks caught a little by surprise by some of the big flooding that happened over parts of the Carolinas. Now this is not going to be happening this time. We think it's going to make a pretty much a straight line here across the center part. And there is going to be a flood potential with the rain. So not only do you have the winds and the storm surge, but you also have some significant rain. Fortunately, most of central Florida can take on these heavy rains a lot better than places like North Georgia, the Carolinas, and eastern parts of Tennessee, because it is very flat. Things run off fairly easily. And Florida gets a lot of rain, so the infrastructure is pretty much there. But when it comes down 8, 12, maybe up to 16 inches of rain in maybe a 24-hour period, you can get some of that flash flooding to come. And then if you've got a significant storm surge, remember, if the storm surge is pushing inland at some of these areas where the rivers are trying to let their water go, when you've got the water coming up the river basins and you've got all this flooding rain trying to exit, it doesn't have any place to go. So that's why it's kind of a double threat there for the potential of freshwater flooding. At the same time, Hurricane Milton is going to almost definitely bring tropical storm force winds to much of central Florida. And of course, there around the eye, probably going out about 45 or 50 miles from the eye, is where we're going to see those hurricane force winds. And according to the earlier advisory, it looks like even western Florida might be starting to feel some of these tropical storm force winds as early as tomorrow morning. That's winds that are over 39 miles per hour. Wanted to show you a couple of areas though. This is down in Cancun, and Cancun kind of faces toward the southeast. So basically, if you're at this camera looking far to the left, kind of over the buildings there where you see the darker skies, that would be the front part of Hurricane Milton, and then they will be able to kind of watch it exit away. But the eye is far enough away that this area here probably will be lucky if they get tropical storm force winds. I don't think they'll see sustained winds that high, but maybe a few gusts. And look at Tampa. Everything is very quiet right now, and one of the big concerns, of course, is the storm surge flooding. So water that's in those canals and in Tampa Bay there, that's going to push inland, and many of these areas would possibly flood, especially if you get something that's between 10 and 15 feet. A little farther toward the south, toward Fort Myers, remember we looked at some of those storm surge values, and even getting down to Charlotte Harbor and down toward Fort Myers, we could see 4 to 8, maybe even up to 10 feet of water. So that's going to push water pretty far inland. And of course, those barrier islands, most of those have already been evacuated, and many of the different zones that are there over central and southwest Florida will be seeing evacuations. You've probably already seen on social media some of the traffic backups as folks were trying to get out, especially there just east of Tampa, Pinellas County, and then moving across the Skyway and heading off toward the mainland part of Florida, and then moving northward to get out of the way. So let's go with some of the models, and the HWRF is still pinpointing a hit just to the north of Tampa. Now, this would send a tremendous amount of storm surge right into Tampa Bay. Again, this is one of those worst case scenarios where we're going to be seeing the hurricane continuing to stay rather strong and move off toward the northeast. So what I wanted to show you though was with the last type of frame that we have on here, and that is the final frame right before landfall. So just to kind of analyze this a little bit, maximum winds 96.3. So you're right there at that Category 3 hurricane, and the pressure 956.7. But this might be already taking into consideration that it is over land by that point. So we still think this is going to be a Category 3 minimum as it makes landfall. And because of where this is coming on shore, you can see that that is going to be pulling in a lot of water right there into Tampa Bay. And then you get down here to the south into Charlotte Harbor as well, where you're going to be seeing those high significant storm surges. Then you got a lot of barrier islands that are right along here too that will experience some significant flooding. And remember, these folks experienced significant storm surge flooding with Hurricane Helene, and there's been a big race on trying to get the debris left over from Hurricane Helene out of the way in preparation for Hurricane Milton. So even though the eye of the hurricane didn't come anywhere near this part of the state with Hurricane Helene, this is still going to be pretty devastating because they took on some of the big effects there with Hurricane Helene. So there's the HAFS model, and again, it's very similar, and I'm going to stop it again there on that last frame. Once again, the HAFS model very similar to the HWRF, although the HWRF kind of came in just a little bit farther to the north. So we're kind of splitting hairs here when it comes to distance. It's only the differences in some of these models is maybe less than 30 or 40 miles. So the effects are generally going to be the same. And of course, you've got that tremendous storm surge that's going to come around the bottom of that and push into Tampa Bay. Everything that's here in the purple, that is hurricane force winds. And those hurricane force winds are probably going to stick around right around the center all the way across the Florida Peninsula before it reemerges out into the Atlantic Ocean. The HMOD, again, very, very similar, probably one of the stronger ones. This one comes in just a little bit farther toward the south, and we'll stop that on that final image, and you can see that this is taking the eye of the hurricane right into Tampa Bay. So you've got not only the tremendous storm surge, but then you've got even more storm surge that's going to be a little bit farther to the south and coming onto some of those coastal areas down toward Naples and into southwestern portions of Florida. But notice with the three models that we've looked at, we had one here, and now we got one down here. So you're not really talking about a big spread when it comes to the distance. And just for fun, there is the GFS model, which takes it right into Tampa Bay. And the Euro model does as well. So I've got 5 different models that are pinpointing that very small area there over the central western portion of the Gulf Coast of Florida as most likely a Category 3 hurricane or higher. So what are some things that are going in its favor right now? Well, it has not been affected by wind shear, and yesterday it was in the perfect environment, but we are starting to see a bit of shear as this trough that's bringing us such pleasant weather here at home is kind of getting on the backside of the hurricane right now. It doesn't seem like it's having much of an impact at this moment, but we think a little bit farther down the road, you can see that some of that wind shear is now starting to wrap its way around the backside of the hurricane, and this is for Wednesday evening. So could there be a little bit of weakening due to the wind shear? Let's hope so, for the fact that these folks have already been through storm surge and now they're going to be dealing with probably a big hurricane. Do I think this is going to be a Category 5 with 185 mile per hour winds at landfall? Absolutely not. I think this is most likely going to be a Category 3 or a Category 4 hurricane when it makes landfall. So there's a lot going for the hurricane, but there are some things that will inhibit some of the development. If we can get more of that wind shear and some dry air to wrap around the backside of it, maybe we can see this weaken considerably and we won't be dealing with something that is catastrophic with when we were talking about some of those hurricane winds from yesterday. So looking at the tropical weather outlook, and yesterday, remember, we had Hurricane Leslie. Leslie has now been downgraded to a tropical storm, and there's a couple of other areas that the National Hurricane Center are watching, but not exactly over concerned with it. And looking at the tropical Atlantic satellite, you can see Leslie out there in the middle part, and you can see Milton there right off the Yucatan coastline. I did want to bring up the Global Tropical Hazards Outlook, and this is going to be refreshed a little bit later this afternoon. And as we're going through this week, obviously you can see that this was pretty much correct, that we were going to be seeing development in parts of the Gulf of Mexico or the Western Caribbean. That has happened. And remember, this is only forecasting tropical development, not track. So even if something's already out there, that doesn't count. But I did want to point out, for the last week or so, we've been talking about maybe some additional development here over the western part of the Caribbean Sea. And this is going out into week, actually now it's next week, October 16th. Remember, this graphic is going to be updated. But something quite interesting, and someone brought this up to me on social media, that they've seen it kind of going around, and it is kind of a scare tactic. There was a model that was a while, maybe a day and a half ago, that had something develop over the Western Caribbean and lift northward, very similar to a pattern that we saw with Hurricane Helene, and even a bit of a cold front that would help to squeeze out moisture over parts of the Carolinas. And that was on Instagram, and the person reached out to me in messaging and was like, is this legitimate? And I had to say, well, yeah, part of it is, because it is a certain computer model that I was able to find, but it was already about a day and a half old by the time I found it. And the forecast was calling for day 12 to 13 on the GFS, because remember, the GFS goes out about 16 days. But if you look at the latest run, and for Saturday the 19th, so that is a week from Saturday, there is an indication that maybe something would be developing over the western part of the Caribbean Sea. But I will tell you, there have been solutions that bring it this way, this way, this way, this way, and several of them pushing it off into that direction as well. So at this point, do we think there might be some tropical development there over the Western Caribbean? Looks like it could happen. Model run after model run indicates something in this area. It's just how strong in the direction of movement. And again, because this is so far out, this is still more than a week and a half away, it's way too hard to tell what's going to happen. But based on the Global Tropical Hazards Outlook that I just showed you, it is showing there's a possibility we could see additional development there over parts of the Central or Western Caribbean. So hurricane season obviously is not over just yet. And one of the other things I wanted to go through was the Atlantic hurricane activity. And this is all coming from Colorado State. Remember how all of the different forecasts came out at the very beginning of the hurricane season? The Colorado State team talking about 23 named storms, and we're way behind on that. And you know what? We're way behind on a lot of what has been forecast, but because October has been so incredibly busy, does that mean we're still going to be seeing more activity continuing in November? Now, most of the time, November doesn't bother us here locally in Louisiana, but you can still get a number of tropical storms and hurricanes that can form well through October and going into November. So far, we've only had 13 named storms, but the forecast was to bring 23. But I wanted to compare this to what is the average, and you can see this hurricane season is already starting to get at or above the average on all of those numbers. And the accumulated cyclone energy, the ACE value, is one of those things that we kind of touched on a little bit yesterday. I've got the definition of it and a link to describing what that is in the description below if you want to check it out. It's a formula that just kind of shows you how busy a hurricane season would be. Now, we're already busier than what an average hurricane season would be, and if we get one more named storm, we've already made it to the average of what a normal season would be. But I wanted to kind of go back on some of their forecasts there. Remember, they had 23 named storms and 12 hurricanes. Well, we've had 9 hurricanes, and we've had, I believe, 4, let me check this out again, I think it's 4 major hurricanes so far. Yeah, we've had 4 major hurricanes so far, so we're getting kind of close to that higher end there where some of these forecasts might verify a little bit. Now, the ACE, I don't know if we're going to get all the way to 240 because we're only about halfway there. But if you notice that once Hurricane Milton makes landfall in Florida, out of the 9 hurricanes that we've had, 5 of those hurricanes will have made landfall in the United States. So as I've told you before, it really only takes one hurricane to really screw up your day. But we've had 5 hurricanes hit the United States out of the 9 hurricanes that have formed this hurricane season. So even though the numbers aren't going all the way up to what was earlier forecast, when it comes to the number of hits that the United States has taken, we're starting to get more on the high end of the scale there. And don't forget, hurricane season doesn't end until November 30th. I mean, we're only right about in here, so we still see about the same amount of activity as we get in the mid to late part of August, and that's just on average. Who knows, we might be able to see additional strengthening of tropical systems over the next several weeks. And just going to look at the Colorado State University team, they put out on Twitter here that for the third time since 1966, the Atlantic has generated more ACE, accumulated cyclone energy, in October than all of August and September combined. The only other cases that happened was back in 1970 and 2016. So even though we can say that some of the numbers haven't quite reached what the forecasts were in the beginning, this is still turning out to be a very, very busy hurricane season. So I hope everybody continues to watch this, and if anybody's over there in Florida, or if you have family and friends that are in that area within the cone or within evacuation zones, and maybe they might be a little stubborn to leave, if you know where they are, I would encourage them to go ahead and make that move. And if you know someone who's being a little stubborn, maybe give them a call, try to give them a bit of a nudge, because this could be a very devastating storm once it moves onto the Florida coast. Of course, the next update with the new coordinates and the new wind speed is going to come down at 1 o'clock. And of course, we'll get a brand new hurricane forecast, cone and intensity forecast coming up at 4 o'clock. I will be posting those on my social media pages. So if you like this video, please give it a like for me and subscribe to my channel and turn on those notifications. And in between broadcasts, make sure you're following my social media pages both on Facebook and X. I hope you all have a great day. Enjoy all this sunshine and cool temperatures. I will see you for Acadiana weather today at 7:30 tomorrow morning right here on YouTube.